Okay, because we've had a couple more people hop on, and so I think we have a quorum. We can call to order and get started, and hopefully others will just kind of hop on as they do. All right, so call to order. Status update. We asked Nader about like budget that's left in, like the monies that are left in our budget. And so he gave us some information on that. And I think we will have money left over because, you know, we get so much money per meeting. And we haven't used all of that for these meetings. And so I think the thought is that we could buy some ad time on TV and radio and things like that that cost money. So that's something that once we get everything set with the new dates and locations, we should really consider is how we want to spend that extra funds to, you know, if everyone agrees that's a thing we want to do, move forward with buying some ad time for our new meetings. That's the only update that I can think of for me. Website, social media, and anything else for Jihan?
Nothing like really important, just posting more maps and stuff. Yeah, nothing else.
Jihan partnered with Josh and they did a really great social media post. If anyone saw it today, it was really perfect. It had a lot of really great maps and information. It was really engaging. So kudos to Jihan and to Josh. Okay. So moving on to the open issues. I know you guys had a discussion about your priorities last week. I watched the video. So we're just going to continue to talk about, I think these will be a shorter conversation, maybe the furthering that list around, do we create a minority district? And then questions for our consultants. So, and then we'll move on to the other bits about the upcoming meetings, because I know we need to discuss that as well. So why don't we just dive right in? I don't know if we should just have a free form discussion, if we want to kind of go through and just kind of see where the numbers are at and what everyone's thinking one at a time, if that makes more sense, if we like how that we've been doing that lately. I'm going to open up the floor to have a discussion about creating a majority Black district and what people want or don't want about that, so we can have a discussion.
Okay, I'll start. I'll bite. I think that definitely we do want a majority Black district. I think it's necessary. If we look at the numbers, it's got to change. It's got to happen. What needs to be in that district? For my just my thoughts, because of my discussion I've had with people at my church and people in my neighborhood, that it's got to have a grocery store. It's got to have access to transportation. It must have the ability. It must have walkable places to go vote. So those were the three things that came up. That didn't change. And then we also talked about 81 and, you know, what's going to happen with that. That's been a lot of discussion, but that hasn't changed for me. So the answer is yes, yes, yes.
Perfect. Who else has feelings that they would like to contribute? Colleen.
All right, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I just wanted to second everything Melody says. I think it doesn't seem like some of those things that she mentioned is within the realm of what we should be looking at, but I believe that we could actually make an effort to see that there are, you know, quality of life amenities in each district, so that if they need to be improved, at least they have some sort of unified force behind each and every neighborhood. And then the only other thing I was going to bring up, I think I saw that now that 81 is officially approved, the The construction timeline, I think, is estimated to be 6 years. And I just think that that probably means like 10 years in realistic terms. So maybe we, you know, put that on the hierarchy towards the bottom of importance. Just wanted to throw that out there. But that's all I have.
Thank you. Tony, I saw your hand go up first, and then we'll go to Bob, and then Jason.
Thank you. Yeah, I concur with what both Melody and Colleen have said. I also would add that a few people at some of our hearings suggested that this is something that we should be considering. So based on feedback from some community members, I think that that's a reason why we should also be considering this. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Bob.
Yeah, I would speak against it in that from my research of what a majority minority district does, it's usually as a result of a problem that has been happening in those voting areas. I don't see that it has been a problem here, and I don't know how we could do it without gerrymandering the lines to make a majority minority district. So for those reasons, I'm against it. I must not have been at the same meeting because I don't think I had not heard this majority minority even mentioned up until Josh brought forth the map showing the fourth district dropping down into the third. So I have not heard anybody else talk about it other than my fellow commissioners here. So I would vote no.
Jason, go ahead.
So I've been playing around with the maps a lot, and I find it actually hard to not make a majority minority district. It's very easy to do. There's zero gerrymandering. And if you follow a lot of the main thoroughfares on that southern side of the city, like where 81's footprint is now, over to maybe even like on a Boulevard over that way, you can easily make a minority majority district. And for optics, because that's always going to be a thing, we get brownie points when it comes to the media. So I think it's a win-win.
Thank you, Jason. Maritza, and then Larry.
Okay, I was looking for my map to figure it out, but Charles sent out an email that he had attended a meeting where he got a room full of suggestions, for lack of a better word, as to how to create a majority minority district and what some people thought about the whole process. And I'd really like to hear from him to hear what kind of feedback he got, because, you know, you have to remember that we destroyed, well, I-81 destroyed the 15th. Sorry, my dogs are acting up. My apologies. Dad's home. So I would like to hear what the feedback that he got from the community members to kind of, you know, because we haven't really had that many community members coming to the forum. So I was just wondering what he heard that might inform our decision on a minority majority district. And I'm going to unmute because they're driving me crazy.
Okay. Thank you, Maritza. Larry.
My second priority when we talked last week was to have a minority majority district. However, I agree with Bob. It shouldn't be done because it's my second priority. It's not as important to me as making sure neighborhoods aren't split up and zigzagging other districts. So if Jason is right, and it's something that we wind up doing without really making the other 4 districts, or as we had said before, districts A, B, C, D, if they're not as unified, then I would not be in favor. But that we'll learn that with map drawing.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, Jason put a link in the chat to, I guess you should think of it as a proof of concept that it is possible, maybe not optimal, maybe not the best, but it's certainly possible to draw a majority minority district as part of a set of 5 districts that all look quite compact. They're contiguous, they aren't funny shapes, to certainly within the tolerance of our current districts, and probably they're even a little better than that. So I totally understand and agree with Larry's point that this isn't something, while I think my understanding of the laws, as Jeff has explained it to us, is that we could sort of draw the lines in ways that might not look natural in order to achieve a minority majority district. We actually don't have to, just as the city currently is.
Thanks, Graham. Maritza?
I'm just wondering, because there's been all this talk about how the 15th ward was destroyed by the configuration of I-81. I'm just curious to know what like the actual boundaries of that ward are, and whether we might be able to, that's assuming that people move out and then move back into the district based on the promises, based in the ward, based on the promises that have been made so far, that if we knew those boundaries, maybe we could use that to kind of help us shape a majority minority district. I'm not sure, because I'm not sure what kind of housing is going to be there. I know it's supposed to be mixed housing, but is most of the population, after having been displaced, going to move back? And that's something that I'm not sure if we should be looking at, just what that ward looked like and how we can kind of maybe make that part of our majority minority district. Just a thought.
Right. We keep coming up against this, and it's something that I think would be really good for our next part, especially, is having a conversation with our experts around like what we can and can't do, or what we should or shouldn't do in terms of 81 and projecting out for the future. I think that these are really like important conversations, and a few of us have already touched on that already. So I think that that's going to be at the center of a lot of what we're discussing. Graham, your hand popped up again.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think we probably should hear from Jeff and Josh, and maybe Jerry if he has things to say. But I do want to agree with Colleen that, especially given the timeline they're talking about for 81 coming down, we just don't have the tools to project what the population is going to look like in those affected areas in the next 6-8 years. And by that time, it's going to be almost time to do this process again. So my preference, if it comes to it, would be to work based on the census data we have and not really spend a lot of time and energy trying to guess about the future.
Before we get into that with our experts, I wanted to voice my opinion as well on the minority district topic before we move on. That I feel strongly. I think that, I mean, I did hear at the public meeting, I think it was the first one, ITC, the Black man who spoke first, I feel like that was something that he brought up. So I feel like I had heard that at a public meeting. But when Josh put up that map after we were talking about it, and like literally like the concentration was just like right there, and he just like drew a temporary line around this potential district, I was like, well, this makes sense, and the numbers evened out perfectly. I was like, this seems to just make common sense. And I think preserving that that voting power, like, yes, like it's not a issue currently maybe, but I think that there is a case to be made of preserving that kind of voting power for those people for the future. We're not supposed to take other, you know, incumbents into account, anything like that. So even though there's other minority counselors on the council, it's just not something we can really look at. And so preserving that for the people of that district seems important to me. Babette.
Hi, everybody. So last week I did mention that we should not take 81 into account because that process, so Graham, you know, that process is so far down the line. And if I read what we're supposed to do correctly, it's based on the most recent census data. So we can't project out what that area is going to be in 6 years. But I do think we need to think historically about what it has been. So even more importantly than the fact that 81 split the area up, you know, 50 years ago, I think for those folks, and especially for the white people on the call who are not familiar with this side of town, is that even though this has been a majority Black district, we haven't always had Black representation. So we haven't always had people who really have taken our best interests into account. And so the fact that you see Black and Latinos on the Common Council now, that's only a recent phenomenon, like in the last 20 years. And as someone who has grown up on the South Side and have lived here most all of my life, except for when I moved to Seattle and Connecticut and then came back home, our interests haven't always been represented. And you can see that by the fact that there hasn't been a lot of investment in our communities, because we haven't had people who have genuinely been concerned about our wealth, our health and well-being, and the things that are important to us. They haven't listened. When we see ourselves being cut out of this process with the county, everybody is calling me. We see ourselves being cut out of this process with the county. So I just want us to be cognizant of that. I don't think we have to make these really weird lines. I think if we kind of cut the lines the way they kind of cut now, maybe take some of the third, and if you don't want to think about the majority minority of district as all being Black, I also want you to take into account that we also have a lot of indigenous people who live like right on the border of the West Side, near West Side and the South Side. And that number is bared out by the school district data. I used to work on the Bureau of Indian Affairs grant for the school district. And we have the largest population of indigenous folks who live in the city outside the reservation, actually live on the near West Side. And then secondly, there's a very large Latino population that lives on the near West Side. So if you want to talk about a majority minority district, if you, I think, can cut the lines in that way where we add some of that area, and that also gives us a grocery store, it gives us price right? Then I think we will be fine. But I just want to be cognizant of the fact that people have not always had our best interest of Black and brown people. So I think we need to cut these lines in a way that makes sure that, at least for the time being, that our voices are heard. That's very important.
Okay. Brenda, I wanted to see if you wanted to chime in at all, and wanted to give you an opportunity.
Well, I really don't have that much to offer other than to say I certainly concur with Babette and what Melody said. And, you know, the data bear out from what I've seen and what I've heard, that it just makes sense to have a minority majority portion there. And I agree. I mean, I'm not native to Syracuse, but I've lived here for over 30 years and I've seen some of the changes. And I think that you have these service deserts that have not served minority populations in the way they need to be served. So if there's any way to look at, legally, redrawing some of the districts to include that, I mean, I would certainly advocate for that at this point.
Thank you, Brenda.
Mm.
Colleen and then Maritza.
Yeah, just really quick, to what Melody said, I think one of the first maps that Josh showed us, I thought was really interesting, where he had a concentration of the filter was English as the second language spoken in the home. And just to speak to her kind of point on the indigenous concentrations and kind of like that west north downtown cluster or wherever it happened to be.
Okay, thank you. Maritza?
I was just trying to pull up my map from my desk. One of the things that we, when I was the executive director at the Spanish Action League, one of the things we found out when we were looking at census data and how to best use that for our clientele was that near West Side is considered the most ethnically diverse area in the city. There are a lot of people there who don't know about because they haven't necessarily been counted in the census, but that there certainly was an extremely diverse population on the West Side. So maybe something we can consider when we're looking at the districts.
So I think that's everyone that has spoken and given an opinion, everyone who's on the call today. So it looks like, the majority of us are in favor of pursuing this option. So I think that it's something worthwhile to have Josh consider, and for us to kind of, when we're talking to him about these maps, it seems like it's going to be in pretty much the majority's mindset to try to work with that majority district. Is that the consensus?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we know where we stand, everyone on the meeting so far stands with that. And I want to slide into the next portion because I think that we've already had a couple of good intros into kind of asking our experts about some of the questions that we have in general, but I think it would be best to start with the 81 issue since we've already discussed that. And I saw Jeff like half raise his hand at one point, like he was gonna say something, but you graciously let us continue. So the floor is yours, Jeff.
Okay.
And Josh, to just kind of discuss, we could start with 81 and we'll go from there.
Sure, just a few preliminary comments. I also did, excuse me, I did want to hear everybody first, and it was good to hear different points of view. And I would just suggest keeping a level of flexibility as we move forward. In just a response on the census data issue, we are supposed to use the 2020 census data as reported. We can consider different kinds of growth in the city, but the numbers don't change. We don't know if 50 or 500 people will live someplace in the future. And we also don't know the future of how long it will take for 81 to be taken down, for new construction to go up, all those kinds of things. So it's best to work with the data as reported. There's some flexibility within the overall deviation to work with. I think what Josh put out a few weeks ago was just a first blush visual to show you what was in the realm of possibility. And I think conversations like tonight's, hopefully public hearings, will help us narrow down the decisions that you'll make. Right now, there's still a level of flexibility in what you're doing, but I get the sense also that that you all want to create a single majority district, and we should just see, how it goes. I don't think the Voting Rights Act per se would tell us that there's a racial polarized voting situation in the city based on recent voting histories. But I think that communities of interest arguments have a very strong hand to play. I heard, about both the Black community, indigenous populations. So all that is very, workable, just to be cognizant of this moving forward.
And Jeff, several people have brought up 81 at our meetings. And so do you think that sharing with them, I know this is like kind of the listening portion up front. We still have 2 meetings to go. Do you think whether it's now or later, we're very direct that we really can't kind of take into account too much of those changes, even if we could work off of other numbers besides the census numbers, that we just don't have the tools to accurately be able to gauge what that's going to look like?
We won't have the
advise
tools.
us to say something?
We won't have the tools to gauge anything accurately or numerically, but it could be taken into consideration as just a factor that 81 is there, and at some point it won't be there, but it might not be there, or it might not be rebuilt during the next chapter of history until the next line drawing a decade from now.
So we could be very direct about that in our next series of meetings.
We could be direct about it, but we should just keep as many options open as possible.
Okay.
This is the first meeting where everybody is really putting out their thoughts. That's very useful. And we may have a very similar or different meeting, 2 weeks from now. But you're all on the right track so far with your thoughts, with your, concepts.
Okay.
Is there a question?
Whoops. I do have a question. Do we have any idea how many people are going to be displaced by the construction of I-81? I mean, I don't know if that should factor in or what the scoop is. I mean, people are going to have to move out of the area as things are being torn down.
I don't know those numbers, but I think it's just one of those factors that we need to just keep in the back of our minds and be cognizant with the deviations and where the lines literally get drawn close to, in proximity to the I-81 corridor or vicinity. But it's risky to try to project too much into the future and adjust the numbers, and there's not much numbers adjustment we can work with either.
I agree. I'm just throwing that out as just something that is going to come up at some point.
Yeah, the Supreme Court has
trying that.
The Supreme Court has often said that the census data changes the day after it's taken.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go with the snapshot of the nation when the count is made.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So very true. So we'll see how it goes.
Okay, go ahead.
So I just Googled, and it says that there are more than 4,000 people who live in 1,000 units of public housing. And one of the things I said at the last week at the meeting is that what's going in is going to be mixed income housing. And so Syracuse Housing Authority is not responsible for rebuilding unit per unit. They only are responsible for providing access to public housing. So they have to just provide vouchers. So if they're, 1,100 units now, they don't have to rebuild 1,100 units. They just have to make sure that, these 1,100 families, or the number of families that lived in those 1,100 units, have access. So they can give them vouchers to go someplace else. So I don't think there's really no way to take into account what that area will look like once I-81 comes down. Now, the other thing is, I heard, and I'm not sure how true this is that when you look at Department of Transportation plans, the plans really only are taken out that area right around Wilson Park, and on the other side where on the other, so when you come down under the bridge where you drop it down, those first couple rows right on both left and right side, that's all the DOT says they have to take out to do this. The rest of that is being pulled out because that's part of Blueprint 15, which has really nothing to do. They're using 81 as a smoke and mirrors for taking out the rest of public housing, but all that doesn't have to come out for 81. It really does not. So, you know, I'm just saying, we're not going to really know what this is going to look like. I don't think there's any way for us to take that into account at all. And we know that, and this is just as Babette talking, we know that we know that a lot of those folks are, if those are going to be mixed income units, we know that a lot of people are going to be displaced because we already have affordable housing issue in the city anyway. We just know a lot of people are just not going to be able to come back to those units because they won't be affordable for people. I'm going to go on mute because I'm not going to get too political tonight because I'm angry, but okay.
Okay, it means you're paying attention. That's good. Stay angry. It's all right. Okay. Brenda. Oh, I think you're still on mute, Brenda.
That better?
Yeah.
Okay. I certainly agree with Babette. You can't know the absolute numbers, but I can tell you that this went on in another county, and the number of people that were displaced to housing, which in the future became a further displacement for them. Whenever I hear mixed population targeted, that means to me you're not going to get the same people there. You're going to get a different mix of people, a different mix of population. And I think that's why it's kind of going to be impossible to kind of figure out your absolute numbers. You know, I don't know. I think we're going to have to go with the data that we have. You know what I mean? And I think somebody had suggested earlier that it's going to shift anyway, assuming that, you know, by the time the 81 project is done, it'll be 2 years to the next census. So, you know, I don't know what that leaves us, but it's just a thought.
Okay. Does anyone have any other either discussion points on this or other questions for Jeff or Josh that you've been thinking about while you were kind of deciding on our concepts and our priorities moving forward? Because this is what we're doing now, is identifying what our concepts are before we start drawing. So questions for our experts.
Yeah,
Tony,
I got
go
a
ahead.
question.
Oh,
I'm sorry, Tony put his hand up before I did.
yeah, Tony, and then I'll get to you, Melody.
Okay.
Thank you. So it's not an additional question, but I wanted to hear from Josh what he thought about initial questions.
Tony, I didn't hear you. What did you like faded out a little bit.
Said it's not an additional question. It's just I wanted to hear from Josh in addition to what Jeff has already said.
Yeah, okay. So the first thing is the couple of majority minority example districts that I put out there were created in an exercise because before you can know under the Voting Rights Act if you have to do something, you have to know if it's possible. So I showed two of the many ways that could be done. So what that district looks like could be a bunch of things, but like it was to establish that it can be done. And then looking at, you know, the racially, you know, the potential for racially polarized voting, Jeff and I kind of talked about it and said, you probably don't have to. That doesn't mean that you can't. You're not prohibited from doing so. You're just not required from doing so. So that was an exercise that every place that I do this for, it's a necessary step in the process. And now, you know, the commission gets to decide what the priorities are and what you guys want. And my job is to map it. In terms of I-81, the criticisms that the people that are leaving are not going to be the same people coming back are absolutely 100%, you know, nail on the head. I think My personal opinion is that the way that public housing has been handled since, the urban renewal period in the United States has been a travesty
Mm.
and a missed opportunity. We spent billions of dollars in Syracuse, billions of dollars in the Hudson Valley, billions of dollars in all these small cities everywhere to create housing projects, to create these massive highways that carve up our cities, that redefine the character and not necessarily or typically in a positive way. In terms of utilizing the information that we have for redistricting, we're a little bit limited, right? So if we know that a section of 81 is coming out and that we're going to be boulevarded, and that in 6 to 10 to 12 years, depending on cost overruns and how long it takes them, that this place is going to be a little bit more included in like this neighborhood. Like right now, the neighborhood dividing line is very harsh because you've got an elevated highway that you've got to basically go under, and people don't cross those boundaries. Like it's very much like the Great Wall of China. Oftentimes, you don't see a lot of going back and forth there. It actually kind of reminds me of like, if you've ever seen the demographics of New York City, in Brooklyn, there's DeKalb Avenue, and I call it the Great Wall of DeKalb because on one side it looks one way, and on the other side it looks completely different. And Syracuse is actually, it's remarkable, I think, that this is coming down. How the housing is being handled around it is kind of one section. So if you wanted to consider, for instance, that this is going to come down and this area is going to be more part of this neighborhood in drawing those lines, like that's fine. If you're taking a look at it at a place and you're saying there's more housing that's going to be built here, and we want to actually like underpopulate this district that this is in to afford for that growth, then that's cool too. Like within the constraints of the acceptable population deviation and things. But you're also not like you don't necessarily have to. There's not a compelling reason to, and I think like how much you want to address that in this go round is probably going to be contingent upon your belief that this is actually that the 81 project is going to be completed within the time frame for next redistricting. But I think like it is also important, though, we take into account the character of place, the character of community a lot when we're trying to figure out how do we group people with similar interests that are aligned so that their voices are heard and so that their needs are not overheard. And so I think that's an important consideration in the process. We're not going to be able to know directly any kind of numbers beyond the fact that X number of housing units are going away and Y number of housing units are coming there. I would say like one of the things that I notice a bit in places that gentrify, if you believe that's what's going to happen in the area, is that quite frequently, despite an influx of many people into an area, what ends up happening is the population decreases. We saw this in the Hudson Valley with the influx during COVID of people from New York City. And it's just because the demographics of people are different. And generally, the higher income, a household is, the fewer number on average of children that they have. And so you may have and new people coming in, displaced people going out, unless you have a net positive in terms of number of housing units. So, I mean, in terms of the population numbers and looking at this in redistricting, I think that it's probably more advantageous or more sort of realistic to look at it in terms of like what parts of a place, what is how is the neighborhood going to change? Is the neighborhood going to include this? Do we think a new neighborhood is going to spring up because of it? And how does that look in terms of the way that we view what's already here and the city that yeah, so that's I see a hand up, so I'll answer question.
No, I was just going to say, I did put in the chat. So Blueprint 15 is using the purpose-built communities model, which they've built, I think, in like 22 cities around the country. And in every community, in every Black and Latino community that they've used this model in, they've displaced people, and the area has gentrified. As a matter of fact, Atlanta was the first city that they used this model in. They put a freaking golf course in the middle of downtown Atlanta. That sounds
kind of tone deaf.
Yeah, well, duh, because and Josh, and their reasoning for that was, and I don't, was, well, fees from the golf course actually will pay for programming for poor Black kids. So that's why we put the golf course here, which is BS. But this is the model that they're talking about using. So I know we can't really use because they haven't put the model in place, but clearly the model that they're going to be using, we know that in 10 years, this population will be very different, just based on the data, hardcore data from the model that's been used in like 22 other cities. I put the link into the chat. So if anybody wants to check out purpose-built communities, it's there.
One of the other things this is kind of outside of redistricting, so I'll be very brief, but one of the things you might also want to look at is in the affordable housing application with the New York State Department of Housing Development, is if they use for their mixed income, their affordable units, if they use the median income for the county or the median income for the city, because I imagine those two are different. Colleen, you have your hand up?
I was just saying, this is just my personal opinion, but for any of the sections of 81 that are close to SU, I would not be surprised if Syracuse University scoops up a lot of the properties for housing, because they have a shortage of housing, and it could just be more transient population in that, at least in that one section.
As opposed to now where it's in a place where Syracuse University students dare not tread.
This is Mel. I did have a question, but Josh and all that, you did answer some of it. And then Colleen spoke directly to my issue with Syracuse University and what was going to be, I call them an outlier because they do come along and they just scoop everything up, just like she said. And this is going to be prime real estate for them to do whatever it is that they want to choose to do right beneath them. And I wouldn't put upstate out of that mix as well. I see a new building coming up for them in that same area. So I think that they're going to utilize that and scoop it up before anybody even has an opportunity to think about replacing housing. I just see that in my head, that it's not going to be something that so you're right. It's not going to be the same people coming back, because there won't be any reason for them to come back, because there won't be any housing, grocery stores, transport. It just won't be there. So you don't come back to that location. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you, and you may know this, in other areas where, because you talked very eloquently about what urban renewal did and using smaller cities, how did the population shift over time? This is just my curiosity question. In areas when they did take any bridges down, if they have done that yet, and I don't know if that's the case, or even when they put them up, did populations shift and change significantly in other areas of the city to the point where we may have to look at that as well? I know we don't have to, because that's not our job, but just as a informational thing, like, okay, we know that there's going to be a lot of disproportionate numbers of elderly and of people of color who are going to be moved, people who have disabilities. That's just who's in that housing right there. Okay,
Yeah.
and so we know that's going to happen. So what happens in outlying areas?
So there are so few places that actually do this because of the monumental costs to be able to do that. And in some places that I know of, they've done like boulevarding of highways that were built, but not coupled with the taking down public housing and things along those lines. And because the transportation and the public housing, are so interlinked, in that I can't really speak from any area of expertise. I can point to, a dozen examples where urban renewal has carved up a place and created natural boundaries that reinforce existing demographic boundaries. But I don't, this is, Syracuse is really on the cutting edge in terms of trying to undo some of the harms of the urban renewal period. And so I don't really have any information about what other places look like.
Okay.
And even if I did, it wouldn't be at a scale anywhere near what Syracuse is doing. So I don't even know that it would be applicable.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That was just my curiosity question.
If I could
It's
just
not
add to that
redistricting.
answer, it's a little bit out of date to compare apples and oranges, but what happened in New York City 70 years ago, some of the remnants are, still remain. When the Brooklyn Queens Expressway was built in the 1940s, it separated a community in Brooklyn called Red Hook, and it really severed Red Hook from the rest of the city practically. What you have had left there was the largest black NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority complex in the city as an island by itself with no mass transit except for a bus, with limited shopping or access to the rest of the world. Then you had the waterfront, which just became more decrepit with shipping going down since World War II. But then in the last 10, 15 years, it became a renaissance of wealthy $1 million homes along the
Mm-hmm.
waterfront. This could not have been planned back in the 1940s when it was left for, on its own. And similarly, the areas along the Brooklyn waterfront south of there, where the Brooklyn Queens Expressway cut off 3 avenues worth and about 30 blocks long of community, it went downhill. Now all of a sudden they're taking these World War I, World War II shipping facilities that were falling apart, and they're becoming again a $1 million complex.
Mm-hmm.
And the local community on the other side of the expressway is complaining that none of the jobs, none of the growth will impact them. So the point is, when you change these communities, it's often hard to know, and the results might not be known for 5 generations later. If we're
Okay.
watching this in New York City.
Mm-hmm. So you don't even though we have New York City to look at and we have Syracuse from 50 years to look at, you wouldn't say to even try to include that in our thought processes or thinking.
No, I think Holly made a good point that Syracuse University is likely to buy up whatever they can, which
Yeah.
which might not be mixed housing. So
Yeah, they
uh,
have that reputation already. We know they buy it up.
yeah.
Yeah.
And this
Mm.
also was played out in the Boston area where Harvard was accused of just buying up as much real estate as it could all over the place. It ended up in having neighboring communities go to war against the university.
Mm. Mm.
Maritza, you have your hand up?
I was just thinking that, just going back as to how attitudes was when home headquarters, when the West Side Initiative was really active under the former chancellor, that they rebuilt a few homes and had higher income people moving in. And I'd be curious to know, like, did those people stay? Did they move out? How's that going to factor into what that mixed housing would look like, if that's something we can even consider on this committee? I might just be taking this a little too far.
Yeah, I don't know that you can make any predictions. I've seen these things go two ways. One is where a place becomes so run down in a place that's otherwise completely unaffordable that it gets redeveloped, as Jeff said, like in Poughkeepsie, we actually see this where the Route 9 arterial cut the city off from its own waterfront. And then that was former industrial sort of sites and things along those lines. And so they built a lot of luxury housing there because you could be in the city of Poughkeepsie, but you didn't actually have to interact with the city of Poughkeepsie. I've seen another project where it was actually the Lucky Platte department store was turned into a mixed income housing. And what ended up happening is they filled up the first 3 floors very easily with Section 8 vouchers and things along those lines. And then the luxury apartments didn't sell at all. And so that went the other way, where now the entire building is subsidized housing of one shape or another, and gorgeous apartments for what they are. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's so many factors that can go into these things that really, I don't have a crystal ball that functions in this department. So
Well, I tell you, I appreciate your thoughts and your input, you and Jeff. I really do, because we're going to get these questions at at the meetings. And I think if we have a good history, not that we can't predict what's going to happen, but if we have a good history and we know that this is what happened in this location, this is what happened in the past, we're aware of what happened in Syracuse, we can just say, you know, we just have to keep our eyes open, but we cannot make any decisions on that. But I think we have to really let it be known that we're aware of these things. We just can't make any decisions on it. I don't want us to come across like we don't know it's happened before.
Yeah, I think demonstrating knowledge is as important as saying there's the things that you know you don't know. You know, both of those things are very important, and yeah, I think that redistricting is incredibly important, and it's kind of the foundation of our democracy. But it's also not a panacea for all of the ills of a place. You know, you can't solve. You can only solve a very limited set of problems with it, but hopefully if it's done right, you can lay the foundation so that, you know, so that your elected officials can help, you know, to tackle some of the issues.
Thank you. Because one of the things that we were talking about was at that last meeting, one of the speakers thought we were all elected officials.
Oh.
And so that's how come he was saying that you have to do this and you have to do that. And so we were explaining to him afterwards, no, we're not elected officials. You know, this is your elected official. That's your elected official. You know, so it was interesting that he came across like that was his concern, that he wanted us to be aware of some things. So knowledge, we have to be knowledgeable. We just can't give our opinions because that's not our place to give our opinions in public.
Josh, I had a question. It's a slight pivot, but I think it could connect. I wanted to make sure that I was understanding you correctly several weeks back, and it could connect into what we're talking about. When we were discussing, like you said, like you guys need to like develop your concept of like, what are you looking for these maps? Like, what's your idea so that then you can start to draw. I was under the impression that you had made a suggestion that like we could potentially have a couple of different maps, a couple of different options to present at this like next 5, you know, meeting schedule and kind of get input on like multiple different versions, and that would just give us more data. But then in talking to some other people, I was thinking, oh, maybe I got that wrong. So I wanted to see if like that was like too confusing, or if that is good, or if that was not at all what you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, that's not an issue. My suggestion is that this entire exercise is to start with all the options on the table and then start to decide which options you think need to be incorporated in a plan. Now, if you have two concepts or two options that people feel strongly about, and it doesn't even have to be like a 50-50 split, but if there's a diversion within the commission, and some people would really like to see how this plays out, and other people, and those things are conflicting, then there's no reason why you can't have two plans that demonstrate that and present both and explain what the overall concept and why there's a diversion there. I mean, ideally, the idea here is to sort of pare down everything that you can agree on, and, you know, hopefully get to a point where everybody can kind of live with a single plan. But in that process, there's no reason why you can't have competing versions. And, you know, sometimes in that process, you end up taking elements from one and elements of another and creating a whole third set that incorporates what people agree are the best of both of those things. So yeah, there's no reason that you can't do that. You know, so there's when we talk about versions, there's kind of two types. There's one that's an iteration on a previous version, and then there's another that's a completely different map. And so I have a tendency, just when I do it, to name the completely different maps like by letter. So I'd have plan A and plan B. But if I have plan A and then another version of plan A that's either slightly different or an iteration of the first one, I'll have like plan A version 1, plan A version 2. And that way, to try and keep separate in our heads what what it is, you know, because technically they're all different plans, even if they vary very slightly. So that's where the sort of concept idea comes in, is that a group of concepts will form a plan A, and maybe a different group of concepts form a plan B, and maybe some of those concepts are shared, but some of them are kind of diametrically opposed. Then you would have that kind of fork. What I would suggest to try to avoid is a situation where you have a plan A and plan B, and then hit another one of these diametrically opposed, and then have an A, B, C, and D stemming from two different versions, because at that point we're working in the wrong direction.
Thank you. Jason.
Yeah, one of the issues I see is that we're kind of stuck in neutral when it comes to these plans. With all the talking and the public meetings we've had, I think like a total of 4 neighborhoods have actually been brought up in discussion. John brought up Eastwood, for instance. I brought up downtown. The gentleman at most of our meetings has brought up Washington Square, and then of course the South Side. We're not getting anywhere. We're not giving our opinions on, okay, what neighborhoods should go in with the South Side, what neighborhoods should go in with the North Side. We're kind of in that neutral zone where we're talking about 81 coming down, which we have no power over and we have no data on. So I think we need to move forward on the data we actually have and the things we can control. So I just think we need a little refocus.
I think that sounds good. You're right. So I wanted to, I think it's important to have structure with a big group like this. So like if we had, and I don't know if this is the way to move forward, but is it something that we should like have a structured kind of thought process and then discussion on like what neighborhoods to go together, or everyone draw like your own maps and then we kind of come together? How do you think we should go about doing this?
I mean, using Josh's skills, we'll call it. And I think you weren't here last meeting, but I volunteered only because I've been playing with these maps for a couple weeks now. But I think it would be in everybody's best interest to use that link and create your own. That way you'll be able to see what obstacles there are and maybe what your ideals are of like, oh, maybe these neighborhoods like really can't go together, or maybe, wow, these can go together, or whatever it may be, whatever your expectations are. Maybe they can be quelled a little bit by actually getting your hands dirty and looking at it, moving the lines around, seeing the populations of the different neighborhoods, and how maybe North Side maybe can't encompass Eastwood if we want to include Washington Square, things like that, for an example. So I really think we should all give it a shot.
Maritza and then Colleen.
Yeah, I was just looking at the map, and as I've said in my comments that, I ran for the 3rd district and went all around the 3rd district and figured out, holy cow, this is just like spread out all over the place with many different neighborhoods. Is it possible? I know that Josh provided us with this map, but is it possible to get from the Board of Elections, because they do it at every election, like just get the maps of what the districts look like now? Because then I think I would have, right now I just don't have a better feel of who's where and what. But if I had the district outline, then I could go through and say, okay, here's the valley, here's this, here's that. This is what this district looks like. This is what this other district looks like, and how do we make them more equal? So I'd like to get some district maps from the Board of Education to be able to say, okay, here's what we're dealing with, and here's where we'd like it to go. Because right now we just have a map of all 5 districts like lumped together. So for me, I'm a visual person, and it's very hard to look at like who's what, where's what, because that's how I know the neighborhoods, having worked as a poll inspector. It's like, no, you don't belong in this district, you belong in that district. So that would make me feel a little bit better if I just had an idea of what the districts look like now, and then try to figure out how to group people together based on what I know about the districts. I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but just something I'm throwing out.
I just
I
want to
would
throw out a
definitely
little
recommend.
something. I'm sorry, Mo.
Yeah, 2 seconds. I would definitely recommend always looking through the chat feature on these meetings, because people post these links to these maps. There's also the maps that Dustin gave us, and I think that included the current map plus his 2, proposed maps, and they are in the Google Drive. And so there is a lot of information that we do have already. You just have to kind of like go looking through a lot of our files for it. So go ahead, Melody.
Okay, I just wanted to say, yeah, I was going to reiterate what you said, that the chat has been full of stuff and that Dustin does have those kind of things. But I'm a very visual person. And one of the things that I kept coming across in my mind is, can we get a huge map of the 5 districts, and then we can, and it's something that that we can write on and erase and look at. I'm visually impaired. I'm going to be honest about it. Okay, so I need to see things. And when I look at those maps, I have somewhat of a seeing, but I need bigger letters. And I know I'm just one, and I need bigger things to look at. But if we could have and when I mean big, I mean big. I mean something that I can look at it and go, oh, okay, there's so-and-so street, and that's going to be that district. And then we can write on it and may use dry marker or something and look at the different variations. I think us doing it like this, we're talking, and we're sharing our thoughts and sharing our thoughts. But I'm with Josh right now. We got to put pen to paper and let's get it done. Let's get it done, or let's start getting it done. Maybe it might not be the best way. I'm not expressing it the way everybody's liking it, but that's just how I feel right now. It's at a point now where we've got to move forward, and I really would like to be able to see what everybody is saying instead of just thinking I see it. Does that make sense to you, Mom?
Yes, absolutely. Colleen, Graham, and then Babette.
Just to the point of the interactive map that Graham and Jay shared, is it worthwhile for those who want to look at it in that mode to have like a little tutorial on how to manipulate it at the next meeting? And then also, that just wanted to point out that might not be for everybody. And to Melody's point, like maybe we have physical maps. We can just figure out what everyone's best format is for kind of looking at the data.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Looks like Jay is saying that he'd be happy to kind of do a screen share and play around in one of our meetings. Graham, you had your hand up, so.
Yeah, thanks. So that's a great idea, Jason, and I'm happy to try to help. But I think Melody, you're absolutely right. We are just about at the point, I think, where we need to be in a room, all looking at a map, and talk about what the constraints are.
Mm-hmm.
What I think Jason was suggesting, what I was certainly thinking was, we're in the couple of weeks before we're going to be able to do that. And it is in this time that I think it was super helpful to me. I should just say that it was super helpful for me to spend some quality one-on-one time with the map on my own to get an idea of what the constraints are. That, I was just talking to Jason a second ago, that if you want to have the minority majority district, and you want to use 690 on the east side as a dividing line, you actually find you can't quite do both without sort of doing gymnastics to make it work. So to get an idea of what expectations, what desires are compatible with each other, it was really helpful to me. And I totally understand that not everybody thinks about these things in the same way or can sort of approach them in the same way. But just to spend some time trying to move some stuff around first, so that when we get in the big room with the big maps, fantastic idea, that we all kind of have a shared place to start from for what's reasonable to expect from that conversation.
Thank you, Graham.
That go ahead.
I was just going to say the same thing. I just want to echo for what Graham just said, because I was going to, so I'm going to, if we don't want to use the room at City Hall, the public library downtown actually has a beautiful community room with a screen that is like amazing, that we can go in and use that, and I can get the room for us. And the public library downtown is open a couple nights a week. But I'm also thinking, like, when we do the community meetings and we're showing those maps, and that just also means we need to be in rooms where people can see us manipulating the lines as people are talking. So does that then impact where we have our second round of meetings, which I think it should, because I Melody, just like you, I think people are gonna need to see it in a way that makes sense for them because of the way we all learn and pay attention to things. So being able to see the lines move like in real time. So just making sure that we're in rooms where we can actually do that. And my eyes are getting older too, Melody. So I'm straining. So I'm with you, girl.
Thank you. What I usually do though is my eyes are fine. I just was trying to think of a way to, put it out there that everybody felt comfortable in receiving it. That's what I was trying to do. Yeah.
I think the nice thing about the link though that Jason shared is that it also updates the numbers. So you can look at something visually and just draw lines around streets, but how we know it's in the realm of keeping the population all similar is important too. So just something to consider.
Can I ask a question? Does Mal, do you have any idea how much longer we're going to be on here? Because I was just called into another Zoom, and I just wanted to make sure. I know Tony and Jackie and myself, we did want to spend a little time on our suggestions.
We still have all of that to discuss, so I think we're probably going to go right till 7. So we're bringing up there's a few different threads that are coming out here. Like I am in complete agreement about we need to move along and get talking about some of this map stuff, and it's good that some of us are having individual processes, but shared group processes, I think this is where we're at, to start playing around with some of this stuff. It leads to another topic of like in-person meetings and things like that like we just like also have to discuss. I do see that Larry and Josh both have their hands up as well. So I want to get to them before we do have to make time for that. Everyone got the email about the locations and things like that. So we do need to check in on that. So Larry and then Josh.
I wanted to pick up a little on what Molly said, at least what I think she said about the idea of in our next go around, after we've kind of individually played with the maps and after we've met together as a group, I'd much prefer that if we can reach a super majority, whatever that number is, that we agree with our own maps, not to present several maps at the public meetings for people to argue about. If we're in agreement, and I'm not sure what agreement is, I would say 2/3. It's just throwing it out, but that's something I think we need to talk about either at one of these Monday meetings or we're all together. Because I much prefer that if we were to have done the work, to just go by our agreements and still wait for public input, but not think that we have to depend on public input.
Thank you. Josh, did you have anything to add?
I was just going to say that if it would be helpful for me to create a map of the city with the current district boundaries and the election district boundaries that is in such a high resolution that you can zoom in wherever you want, that I can do that. I think that the online tool is probably easier to work with because you have the populations right there and it does the math for you. So, having a map that has the numbers of the census blocks or election district populations and things, and then drawing it by hand, you have the issue where you have to sum everything and then subtract and all of that every time you make a change. You have to do the math. But I'd be happy to make a high resolution map if commissioners would feel it was helpful.
I would.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Babette, was your hand still up from before, or did you have something new? Okay. All right, good. Okay, so I think that I think most of us are in agreement. I'm seeing even just some like head nodding that like we're raring to go, wanting to kind of start playing with some of these maps. Please, I think I'm guilty of this too, where I see a lot of good information in the chat and then like it's over, like the meeting's over and like it's all gone. And so like click on some of these links, pull it up in your browser now so that like you just can have it, and continue to look at that Google Drive. I know we've been in meeting mode and not necessarily as focused on some of that stuff, but Jihan does a really good job of kind of organizing and throwing things in there so we can make sure these links and things are in the drive and we can throw them out in an email as well. So moving into a discussion, I think next time we'll put on the agenda, we'll have like maybe like a formal vote on in-person meetings, give everyone a chance to play around on their own. That will be homework, play around with the maps digitally, and then we can hopefully vote on like if we can just like do an in-person meeting and where we'd want to do it, all of that stuff. I think that would be wise because we're coming up on this time. So, okay. Tony and Melody, I know you, along with Jackie, had some discussions about locations. You had some good ideas about that, and you wanted us to discuss.
Sure. So yeah, the three of us met on, or well, we Zoomed on Saturday, and had a conversation about possible venues for the next 5 meetings. Part of that discussion centered around how do we, create opportunities not only for people to participate, but especially for people who may not have participated in the past or previously or that sort of thing. So we were thinking that we might want to move away from the high schools, even though we know that John's family and Jihan did some unbelievable prep work setting up those situations to work effectively for us. We think that it might be advantageous for the commission to consider going to smaller venues and possibly in different locations, places where folks who may not necessarily participate all the time would be comfortable walking to, or whatever you might want to call it. So that's part of the thinking. The other question that we had to the commission, to the full commission, should we consider a system date for these meetings, meaning like all Tuesdays in May and June or something like that? And that was a conversation that we had. John did clarify for us that based on the responses to the survey that John put out, those are the best. Those dates are pretty much set in stone, and there are reasons for why those dates are sort of set in stone. So that question, I guess, has been answered for us. So I don't know that we need to get into that. We did come up with at least 5 different locations for each of the 5 meetings in each of the districts. I don't know if you want me to just kind of outline what those possibilities are, how you want to we can just make some decisions about it, or
Right. Well, I think, I don't want to, I give everyone a chance to kind of chime in. I do think you guys did a really good job. Like once, now that the dates are, we had a discussion about the dates, we did the doodle poll. Now that they're set, I do feel comfortable mostly letting you just kind of like do what you do. So if you want input from us in terms of locations, we can certainly give that. But after this conversation, I think that you guys just moving forward with what you think is best wouldn't make sense to me. I do think that it's wise, to have maybe a more conducive space for not 200 people, because we see we're not getting that, but it's also a different round of meetings. And so I'm like, maybe we will have more. Will we have more to fill up an auditorium? Probably not. But I did like that idea of, potentially looking at some different venues that would feel more accessible to people. I do just want to make sure that we have people who will volunteer to take on some of that role of, there's a lot of legwork that goes into that even I don't necessarily see, because like we just kind of roll into meetings sometimes, but there's a lot of legwork that goes into some of that and doing test runs and all that. So if we're going to pick other venues, I think that it is, important that some of us, myself included, take on a more active role in doing that.
yeah, and we did consider that. We were like, like I said, John's family and Jihan put in a lot of legwork, especially on the front end, making sure that things were set up and arranged for these opportunities to happen. So we get that. Anyway, we also thought that the optics might look better, and I guess maybe that's where we might want some feedback from the full commission. Like, we think that a smaller venue, if you have 20 people that show up, it looks better if it's in a smaller venue than, in a huge auditorium. So I don't know. That's something that we also.
What do you guys all think? Larry, go ahead. Oh, hold on, Larry, you're muted. Still muted, Larry.
Sorry. I really
There you go.
appreciate the work that you and the committee are doing. But I don't think that, I mean, we've had these discussions many times about the number of people that attend isn't necessarily related to the venue site, but the information that we have, which is not much the first time around. I think the high schools were a good idea. They're in each district. There's parking, easy to get to. People know where it is. It's not on some secluded area that people that live locally know, but the rest of the city doesn't, because we're not having meetings necessarily just for people that are around the venue, but it's open to the entire public. So I would vote continue the same places that have worked, I think, well. I don't think the number of people should be what you go by.
That's a good point, Larry. One of the things that we did look at when we were talking about different locations is that we did want to, the high schools were still kept in the mix. We did not take them off the table. We tried to look at 5 separate locations in each one, and the high school was one of those 5. In some locations, we chose 6. But we did look at, as Tony said, the fact that if it was a location that was in smaller, I mean, we stepped in it and decided that we probably will not get more than 100 people at any meeting. We just threw that in there and made that guess. Okay, so then we said, let's look at venues where 100 people can be accommodated, but it also looks like a full room. Okay, and so we looked at that as well. We not only were thinking about you know, people coming, but also aesthetics. And we looked at walkable places, and we did keep the high schools. We looked at community centers. We looked specifically at places where events were already taking place, so people were aware of what they were in their location. So we spent quite a bit of time on that. So, and it was already sent out to everybody. So you guys, if you look in your emails, we sent it out, all the locations, and we didn't give you our reasoning behind it, which is why tonight's meeting, but we did want you to know that why are you shaking your head, Tony?
Because we only sent it to
Oh, I thought it went to everybody.
yeah, no.
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay.
The chair, the vice chair, and Jihan.
Well, send it to everybody.
Can you just give the list real quick?
So District 1, McChesney Center, DeFrancisco Peace Center, Tony's Restaurant, the Northeast Community Center, and Henniger High School. District 2, Huntington Learning Center, St. Lucy's Church, La Liga, which was the Spanish Action League, Seymour School, the Boys and Girls Club, Fowler High School. District 3, the Bob Cecil Center, Elmwood School Building, Well of Hope Church, Loretto. There's a facility on Onondaga Park which hosts neighborhood watch meetings. We were considering that, and Corcoran High School. District 4, Syracuse Model Neighborhood, which was formerly the Southwest Community Center. Toomey Abbott, Hops Memorial Church, Tucker Missionary Baptist Church, Beecham Library, ITC High School. District 5, Geronial School, Ed Smith School, Boys and Girls Club, Bishop Harrison Center, the Euclid Community Center, Irwin Methodist Church, and Nottingham High School.
So you can see we chose large and small, and we were thinking about parking in every situation. And that they were walkable. So we looked at it a little differently this time.
And again, we're fine with the subcommittee making the decisions about the best possible location and just coming back to the commission and saying this is what we decided and this is what we decided for each date. Because that was the other piece of the puzzle. We were thinking certain districts are better for certain days of the week. Like District 4 should probably not be on a Sunday, as an example.
Okay. And you need to explain why, because in District 4, there are over 35 churches in like a 6-block area. So folk gonna be in church.
It's all church. Yeah. You know, we have to recognize what, I guess one of the things that Josh was going after was, well, what do these neighborhoods really look like? And we know that there are neighborhoods that on, I can't recall if it's Wednesdays or Thursdays, but I think it's Wednesdays that they're in church. And then they're also on church on Sundays. So how can we reach out to those communities where they're already congregated and it's not like an extra trip they have to make to another venue?
That's a good point, but fortunately, none of the meeting dates are on a Wednesday.
Okay.
So we don't have to grapple with that. But again, the subcommittee can come back together. We'll make our decisions about it and come back to the full commission and say, this is what we think would be best. And we hope that you guys are good with that.
And one of the things we looked at and as we discussed in length was the possibility of having all of these public hearings, particularly these next 5, on a consistent date and time. Be it always Tuesday, always Thursday, always Friday, so that the community gets in mind, oh yeah, on a Friday there's going to be that meeting. Oh yeah, next Friday they're going to have it again. Next Friday they're going to have it again. Yeah. Not knowing if it's doable, not even for us, because of people had their preferences, but we just discussed it.
Right. Yeah, I mentioned that earlier, Melody.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that piece.
That's okay. And so and I clarified that, you know, the dates that we have are the dates that we have. So.
But I don't want to buy into that, I guess. I really
I mean, it certainly, I mean, it certainly can be another discussion. We had that discussion. Jason, I think, was the one who had brought up, like, why don't we just do it like all on a particular day? But when we're talking about, you guys did a good job talking about accessibility in venue, but I think we also need to look at accessibility in terms of days during the week. And like, we're coming up against spring sports, and you know, people have commitments that like maybe might fall in their work schedules, fall on like a certain day. So if we limit ourselves to a certain day, the venue is always going to change as well. So it's not like it's just like, oh, on Fridays at this place we go to this meeting. People are going to have to pay attention to the specifics of a meeting time and day and
hear you,
location
Mom.
anyway.
I hear you. Mm-hmm.
So I think for accessibility, we had this kind of debate a few weeks ago before we put out that doodle poll. So I think it makes sense to continue on with what we have now. But I think that the location talk, there's good. I think you guys have a tough job. I see why you wanted input, because there's good points on both sides of the fence. I would probably be more prone, if you were looking for opinions, I'll just state with my opinion. Like I probably just would stay with the high schools with the exception of ITC, just because like we know it and like we're already like there. But as long as it was like set up and all kind of put together, I am happy to go any place that you guys have researched and think is good. I think that is fine by me. So that's just my opinion.
I'm sorry, guys. I have to go into the next meeting. Looking
Yes,
forward to
okay.
getting the minutes. Thank you. Have a great evening.
So what we'll do, the subcommittee will come back together, we'll make some decisions, and then bring this back to the full commission at the next meeting, if that's okay.
Yes, Babette, I just see your hand up before we close. Wanted to get
and I
to
just
you.
want to say, you know, as you're looking at the spots, if we're thinking about places where we can do this with interactive maps, then, you know, a place with real good AV equipment, so we have to tote all that stuff in, actually might help you narrow your list down even more, right? So.
Okay. So everyone needs to focus in. Everyone needs to focus in on playing around with the maps and the software to the best of your ability. Maybe we will tap into some offers from Josh and Jason and Graham next week with just doing some demos and things like that, and having more map-based discussions. And we will finalize those meeting, locations and dates. Feel free certainly to, engage in, some talk to Jackie, Melody, and Tony, whether it's via email or whatever. If you have strong opinions and, you didn't share them here, they really need your input. So they are the people to go to certainly about all of that. Maritza, before we close.
One of the things that I think we're always hearing about is that there are a lot of people who have lots of varying opinions on the transportation center and where it's located, how it's built. That's a whole nother discussion, but I think they also might have really good viewpoints as to how they see the political climate going. So I wouldn't rule out ITC as another place to have another meeting, because it's right there. People can cross the street, come in, ask their opinions. And I think we might just need to do a little bit more work there in terms of getting out notices about the meetings. Because I believe, they have a very strong, active participants committee who are like, this is what we looked at the transportation center looking like. This is what it is, and how do we go to improve it? And I think that we can bring those people in to say, political boundaries and how that's going to affect us, I think we'd have a good population right there that will just come over. It's just right across the street. How could you not come over and say, hello, I have an idea? So I wouldn't throw ITC out of the mix. I think that we would get a lot of people there because of the transportation center, as long as we do the marketing and get the flyers out and get to talk to people who use that station a lot. There's a woman, Alice McRae, who was just
It's something they
very vocal about that. And I think that she could help a lot in getting the information out and getting people to come in to talk about the various districts. I'm just saying.
it's certainly something to think about. I only said not ITC because it was not a good setup logistically, but it's something that they can keep on their radar. Please do,
Right.
Tony.
I
Okay.
think we can work that out. I think we can work out the logistics, but that would be such a central location for everybody who comes downtown to transfer someplace else, for us to get a good idea of how people feel about this. And maybe we'll get like 5 or 6 more people. That would be more than the 5 or 6 people we had at that meeting.
So Maritza, ITC is not off the table.
Okay. I'm sorry. I must have misinterpreted.
No, it's just not off the, I'm just letting you know it's not off the table.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yep.
Anything else from anyone?
Yeah, I was typing it in the chat. I was just thinking about this. Maybe we can, doesn't Central have those electronic signs? So maybe we can ask Central just to be playing like a thing about our different meeting dates on the electronic signs at the transportation system as a way of advertising. And hopefully, because it's a PSA, they will do it for us for free. In addition to putting up flyers, I think there's where you can they have like different commercials that run like as people are waiting for their buses. Does anybody know anybody at Central?
We will look
I don't
into
know
that.
anybody.
We will research that.
Okay.
I can, yeah. My husband's old firm had real big ties to Centro, so I can find out from him who we might communicate with. I mean, it's taking a leap because it's been a few years, but I can certainly work on Centro and see how they can help, if that's okay with everybody.
Partner with Jihan because she'll look into it as well, and you guys can partner on that together. That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely, partner with usually my thing is I give Jihan the information and then say, go for it. So yeah, but if I can get that information as to see how they're operating nowadays and I can find a contact person, then I will just let Jihan know. And then maybe we can work around making Centro a hub, because everybody comes downtown to transfer out. There's just no getting around that.
It is a good thing to look into. Thank you for bringing that up.
I'll try that.
All right. Anything else? Any motions to adjourn?
Oof.
Maritza, motion to adjourn. Second. Colleen. All in favor?
Yay!
Opposed?
Good
Okay.
thing.
I know it went a little long today. Thank you for being patient. We will meet same time, same place next week. And we will just send out like a little condensed like bullet point of your homework and what to be thinking about for the next meeting. Okay.
But good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you.